Welcome to this short webinar, and thank you for giving up your time to invest in your skills. In the next 40 minutes, I want to transform your view of business presentations and provide you with a variety of top tools and tips that you can use immediately in your business presentations. Surveys regularly suggest that the ability to give great presentations is critical to career success. Not only do they suggest it, but on average, 70% of people agree with the fact that presentation skills are critical for career success. You could put a great argument together for suggesting that the other 30% just haven't recognised it yet. We know it's important. More and more we are expected to present our ideas and our results. Here's a mind-blowing figure. 1 billion. What does this refer to? Well, Microsoft recently announced they had added their 1 billionth slide to their PowerPoint design deck. Now, the good news is all 1 billion won't be in the latest version. That would be nuts. It does show how strong the expectation is that more and more we want to present our thoughts and ideas and get them across to people in a way that works. So let me ask you a question. How confident are you when asked to prepare and give a presentation? On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being, move over Richard, I'll take it from here, and 1 being, I avoid presenting whenever possible. So where would you enter your rating on the scale? Probably the most common answers I get are 6 or 7, because presenting is something most people don't like. Loads of surveys have been done over many years about our fears, and typically standing up in front of people and speaking in public comes in the top 4. In a recent Prezi survey, 20% of people even admit to doing anything to avoid giving a presentation. They would go sick, ask someone else to give the presentation, or take time off. So to be honest with yourself, have you ever tried to avoid giving a presentation? Maybe you've just turned the tech off and said, hey, it's just all collapsed. Has this ever happened to you? So this notion of standing up in front of people and giving presentations is pretty intimidating for most people. But I've got some good news. Over the next 35 minutes or so, whatever you scored yourself, I want to share with you some top tips and ideas that you can implement straight away and move you up the scale. I have also included at the end of the session some massive value offers. These are opportunities to boost your skills and confidence even further. So stick with me. There's lots of value, and let's see where we end up. Imagine you've been asked to give a presentation. Maybe a 20-minute project update or a business results briefing. What's one very common experience that sparks familiar despondency into most audiences? 1 of 96. Down at the bottom, the number of slides. Your heart sinks and you know you are potentially in for the long haul. Yet there's a reason why this is such a common experience. In 1990, Elizabeth Newton was completing her PhD in communication at Stanford University, and as part of her final dissertation, she conducted an experiment. It was called the Tappers and Listeners Experiment. She would take 2 students, assign one of them the role of tapper and the other the role of listener. The tapper's job was to tap out a well-known song or musical theme, and the listener's job was to identify it. But before they did that, the tappers were asked to predict their success rate as a percentage. Now, she conducted this experiment many times. So what do you think the typical predicted success rates were? The tappers' predicted success was 50%, 1 in 2. that was what they expected. What do you think the actual success rate was? Remember, the tappers were saying, when I do this, 1 in 2 occasions, they'll get it right. The actual results were 2.5%, 1 in 40. So the big question is, why is that? Think about it. What's going through your mind when you're tapping the tune? In reality, you are probably hearing the tune in your head. So from the tapper's perspective, it's obvious. The problem is this. When you are giving a presentation, typically you are presenting on a subject you know very, very well. Maybe it's a project or subject you've worked on for months, years, or even decades. A subject you are an expert on. You have masses of information, and the risk is that we want to share all of that important information and we assume much of it is obvious. Of course, in your head, you are hearing a wonderfully rich tune, but all your audience are hearing are dull thuds. It's known in the presentation world as the curse of knowledge. The reason a slide deck will say 1 of 96 is that we have so much information we're trying to download. Oh, they need to know this, they need to know this, they need to know that. Unfortunately, that approach usually leads to failure. So the number one secret of great presenters: less is more. It's a simple concept, but it is really important. The shorter and more focused your presentation, the more successful it is likely to be. Don't be fooled though. Short presentations can be the hardest to prepare. So how do you prepare your presentations? Imagine you've been asked to give a presentation. Your boss has come along and asked you to present a project update or whatever. Where do you start? What's the first thing you do? The most common response I get from both my real world and online students is my slide deck. Typically they mean populating slides with their thoughts and data so they can move them around. In other words, if they're not careful, they start feeding their curse of knowledge. They start doing a dump of, what do I know? What do they need to know? This is a mistake. There are 2 key questions, killer questions if you like, that the best presenters ask themselves before doing anything else. Question 1. What is the purpose of my presentation? On the surface, it seems like a very simple question. The reality is, don't accept the first answer you give yourself. Challenge yourself to dig deeper. When I ask people that question, they tend to give vague, general answers. To inform people about, to update people on, to brief the team, or to influence people. That's all fine, but it has no clear focus. The risk is that at the end of the presentation you can ask yourself, did I inform people? The answer is, yes I did, because I shared my message. Job done. Actually, it may have been a very ineffective and so unsuccessful presentation. Typically, we are presenting in business to either get a decision, get some budget allocated, change people's behaviour, implement new processes, etc. It's a very tangible outcome we're trying to achieve. So when you start asking this question, there is a simple technique, often called the 5 whys technique. Don't accept the first answer you give yourself. So when you say, well, it's to persuade and convince my audience about my presentation. Why do you need to do that? Well, they need to know this information and this particular detail. Well, why do they need that? Well, they can't function accurately without it. Well, why does that matter? Well, we get a lot of errors and a high wastage rate. Oh, so the real purpose is to reduce errors and wastage, a more tangible purpose. You'll also know much more clearly if your presentation was effective. So dig deeper into the real purpose of your presentation. It astonishes me how often I've asked people in business, many times over many years, what is the purpose of your presentation? And they can't answer the question clearly and explicitly. If you do not have a clear focus on the purpose of your presentation, or the decisions you make about what content to put in, and more importantly, what content to leave out, are more difficult. The more specific your purpose, the easier your preparation decisions will be, and the more focused your presentation. Often, people tell me this was the most important takeaway, as getting it right greatly impacts the rest of your content decisions and makes them easier. Question 2. If I only had 30 seconds to give my presentation, what is the one key point, the one key message I have to get across to people to give me the best shot at meeting my purpose? Nail that and you have a real focus. These are two vital questions I thoroughly recommend you ask yourself before you give any presentation and before you do any other preparation. Don't start thinking about content or the audience. Get crystal clear on the purpose of your presentation and at least one key point you have to get across to people. This will help you make a significant impact on the curse of knowledge. You can now start thinking about the key tools you have at your disposal during your presentation to be able to connect with your audience and genuinely influence, inform and persuade them in line with your purpose. You may be familiar with the work of Professor Albert Mehrabian, reported in the 1967 papers Decoding of Inconsistent Communication. And that work was around the importance of what we're seeing and hearing. What your audience is seeing and hearing in this instance. Of course, that's visuals, body language, and any slides or other visual aids. It's voice, how you are speaking, how we say what we're saying, and it's words, what you actually say, your content. As a presenter, which of these do you believe is the most important? The work done by Professor Albert Mehrabian suggests visual is perceived to be the most important at 55% of the process. Voice comes next at 38%, and finally words, content, at 7%. This is often challenged research, and for good reason. The big problem is that it seems to suggest if you look good and you sound great, what you say doesn't matter that much. Now clearly that's misleading, and nothing could be further from the truth. Try this experiment after the webinar. Try to communicate a simple business-related message to a colleague without words. Use only visuals in the form of gestures and noise in the form of sounds. You cannot use words. It can be hilarious, but also a really difficult thing to get that message across accurately. Yes, it's important what we look like. Yes, it's important how we sound. But essentially, your message is in your content. The big thing that is often missed in this research is this. As a presenter, all three elements are important tools and they have to be in line. They need to be congruent. You need to be sending the same message with what your audience is seeing through your body language, your slides, your visuals, and how you are speaking, And finally, it needs to match with your content, your data, your stories and examples. It's quite common to go to a business presentation where the words are great, but there is a big mismatch with both visuals and voice. Unfortunately, if there is a mismatch, people tend to go with what they are seeing and hearing rather than the actual content. So if someone is saying, I just need to go and brief my team. I've never been more excited about this. It's amazing. The future's brilliant. The words may be great, but if it is not matched in the other aspects, people are much less likely to believe it and may even be suspicious of your motives. We've said all three elements are important. But in your experience, which of these do business presenters pay least attention to? Visuals, voice, or words? Voice is my choice. When you've been to a great many business presentations, and that tends to be less than exciting, whilst all three areas are important, you quickly realise that very few business presenters spend much time thinking about their voice. Yet that voice is the most important tool you have at your disposal as a presenter to get emotional connection with your audience. So even if you've got great visuals and your content is good, if you just deliver it in a very dry, fairly monotone, boring way, you will quickly lose the ability to connect with your audience. Using your voice well is one of the key ways to get emotion into your presentation. So as a bonus resource, at the end of this webinar, you will be able to download a PDF of some quick vocal warm-ups and exercises, tips to try out to help you strengthen how you use your voice. There are many key elements to think about. These are the areas that really make a difference. Speed, how fast you're speaking. Volume, how loud you're speaking. Modulation, the amount of up and down in your voice. Emphasis, the words that you choose to emphasize. Pitch, how high or low you're speaking. Pauses, a really important one. Pauses. It's amazing how rarely you hear pauses in standard business presentations. So pay real attention to your voice. Think about how you are going to use it. Record yourself practicing your presentations if you possibly can. Maybe pick just one or two of those elements and think about how you can get variety into your voice in a way that matches your content and your visuals. Once you have a clear purpose, key focus points, and you start adding your content, the critical decisions tend to be on what to leave out. Your goal should be simplicity, and in terms of content, bringing your information to life with stories and anecdotes. We've already said that in business presentations, less is more, and keeping things simple is a very powerful way to help people remember your core messages. Simple doesn't mean easy or childlike, talking down to people. It means crystal clear, unambiguous content that is always supporting and in line with your key message. Secondly, the best presenters include stories and anecdotes. These are not gimmicks. They must be used to illustrate your key messages and bring them to life. Stories provide opportunities to make emotional connections to your purpose and make it real for people in a way they can relate to. This is especially true for drier, data-based, financial type material. Often in workshops, I'm challenged by people at this stage saying, Richard, we know you're an amateur actor, and we think you're trying to turn us into actors. And my answer is consistently the same. I do not want you to be actors. I want you to be professional, quality business presenters and stand out from the rest. However, a presentation is a performance. You don't just enter a room and carry on talking in the same way that you would in a meeting or in a conversation with a colleague. When you listen again to the replay of this webinar, you will notice how I've used these techniques within the webinar. The story of the tappers and listeners experiment is a good example. Often, I've used short examples or anecdotes to reinforce a point, aiming to use something that will spark a connection with many people in the audience. In each case, I could have made a simple statement. The biggest problem is the curse of knowledge, as an example. A few people would get the message loud and clear, but most people find it much easier to remember information and concepts when they can link it to experiences and events they are familiar with. Simplicity. Stories and anecdotes make your points more accessible and more memorable. People worry about being seen as unprofessional, but keep your stories short, relevant, on message, and with a clear and obvious link to your content, and your audience will be on your side. A great many business presentations still rely quite heavily on using slide decks. Typically the most common packages, which is PowerPoint, Keynote if you're an Apple user, or Prezi if you prefer the cloud. Fundamentally, there are three ways that people tend to use slide decks in their presentations. Two of which are really not the most helpful and are probably one of the key drivers of the infamous death by PowerPoint. Probably the most common way people use slide decks is as an auto cue. People have sat down, prepared their presentation in their preferred slide package, and it tends to be heavily populated with bullet points, as it's really their presentation notes. Then they use it as an auto cue. Imagine getting home one evening, turning on the TV to watch the news and finding the TV station is simply broadcasting their auto cue. You would think they were mad. Yet that's effectively what many of us do when we're giving business presentations. We are simply presenting our notes to people, which is not helpful and is certainly not a visual aid. The second way people use their slide decks is as handout material. They tend to overpopulate their slides with information because the intention is to give copies of the slides out as handouts later. That is also not a visual aid. There's nothing wrong with using PowerPoint to create handouts if you want to, but keep them at the back of your slide deck and only present from your proper visuals. Of course, the third way is to have genuinely visually based slides that support and emphasize your key points. The classic phrase death by PowerPoint exists for a reason. Don't forget, one of 96. What would you say is the average number of words the typical business presentation slide contains? 40 words per slide. Now, that doesn't sound a lot, but already it means they are tending not to be visually based slides and are likely to be either a handout or far more typically presentation notes for autocue. It means the slide deck is helping the presenter remember what to say next, not helping the audience get the message. So think very carefully about how you are using your slides. Aim for largely visual content that supports and enhances what you are actually saying. A great phrase to bear in mind for any slide is maximize impact, minimize noise. A couple of generally easy to implement key tips to help your slide deck design is aim for one key point per slide and find a way of making your data visual. A great example I saw recently was a doctor talking about obesity data in America. He knew all the facts. He was talking to a room full of fellow doctors. They knew all the facts. He could have put up a table of data, cut and pasted a spreadsheet. What he actually did was put up a map of the United States and slowly filled the states by colour graded by rising levels of obesity. And he was using phrases like, "It is spreading across the country," and "we're physically watching it spread on his visuals," which is a very powerful and memorable way of visualising data, of bringing the numbers to life. So less is more for slides. Maximise the impact, minimise the noise. One key point per slide and make your data visual. Apple also have a great rule for business slides: no more than one number per slide. Think back to my 1 billion slide earlier. That would be an example. I would also like to give you a tip on my acid tests for slides. How many of you have ever used a laser pointer? I have this real thing about laser pointers. I can't think of a single reason from a presentation perspective why you would want to use one. If at any point in your presentation you feel the need to use a laser pointer, it is telling you that your slides are badly designed. If you think you need a little red or green dot to highlight something on your slide, it means it is not obvious to your audience. Ironically, people are rarely able to hold the dot still anyway, and it can quickly become a distraction, and at worst, it turns into one of those mad cat videos with everyone following the dot around the room. So if you are ever tempted to use a laser pointer, my strong advice is don't. It's a sign you need to revisit the design of your slide deck. The final thing I want to speak about, and we started off saying how stressful people find speaking in public, is thinking about how we manage nerves. It's quite normal and common to worry about having to stand up and speak in front of other people. As I've said before, it is in the list of people's top fears pretty consistently, and you have already indicated where you find yourself on the confidence scale. It's okay to be nervous when you are giving a presentation. The trick is how you manage those nerves. I was lucky enough to meet Tim Andrews some years ago, author of Where's Your Spotlight? Enhancing Learning for Others. It's a good book, but also a good metaphor to have in mind before a presentation, especially if you're nervous. One of the reasons presenters get so nervous is that they imagine the spotlight is on them. No wonder they're nervous. In reality, people who seem to be confident presenters are good at turning the spotlight around. In other words, you as a presenter need to be shining the spotlight on your audience and focusing your attention on your audience, giving your audience good value and a clear message. And that actually helps take away the nerves. If you're imagining that you're in the spotlight, your focus is on you. And that's one of the things that will make you nervous. Once you start believing the focus is on you, it's likely you'll start having a lot of negative speak in your own head. What if this happens? What if they don't like it and it becomes a state that feeds on itself? So, if I'm about to give a presentation and I'm busy running through all the things that could go wrong, of course I'm going to be nervous because I'm greatly inflating the risks of what might happen. Think very carefully about your self-talk before giving a presentation and focus on the positive. Focus on giving your audience value and think about where your spotlight is. Increased adrenaline is the prime cause of most nerves. You are effectively in fight or flight mode. So one simple technique you can use before you start a presentation is to take 3 deep breaths. In fact, there's a whole philosophy based on the concept of 3 deep breaths, and I mean deep breaths. One of the things that increases nerves and anxiety is breathing very shallowly. So just fill your lungs with air, hold for a few seconds, and then let the air out slowly and consistently, and do it 3 times. It's amazing the difference that it can make, both with muscle relaxation and helping you clear your thoughts. Then, metaphorically, swing the spotlight on your audience, think about the positives, and go for it. We've already said that for most business presenters, you know your content, you know your subject matter. It's highly unlikely that you will get a question on a topic you are not reasonably familiar with. You may not have the polished answer, but you will be able to give a good answer. The reality is, if you focus your attention on helping your audience get a clear, unambiguous message, you will feel great, and it will stand you out from the crowd. You need to have prepared your content, honed it down, less is more. And as a top tip, practice, practice, practice. I know we struggle to find time to practice, but the more important the presentation, the more critical the decision you are seeking is, the more important it is that you make the time for practice. Most of us carry HD video cameras with us these days in our phones, so it's very easy to film yourself. None of us like it, but the reality is that when a camera is filming, it is seeing and hearing what your audience is seeing and hearing. So it's brilliant feedback for you as part of the practice process. So practice, practice, practice. Film it, record it, and keep your spotlight focused on your audience. Well, that wraps up what I was planning to get through. Just as a reminder, if you've made it to the end of the session, here are some offers to help you continue to build your skills. You can get 60% off my Business Presentation Skills Made Easy course. It's a 2.5 to 3 hour video-based online course at the bargain price of £18 plus VAT or equivalent. Around 4,000 people have successfully taken the course to date. If you prefer, I currently have a course bundle available covering a range of management skills from recruitment interviewing to giving performance feedback. Again, you can also get 60% off this bundle, which makes it £70 plus VAT, and it has around 20,000 users across those various topics. Simply visit the link displayed and use the appropriate code to get the offer. Online learning is a rapidly growing area and offers many benefits, such things as convenience and easy access. It's available 24/7 to fit with your schedule. There's no travel. It's flexible. Learn where and when you like on a range of devices. It's cost effective. It offers great value learning even before my offer to you. Well, that wraps things up from me. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Enjoy putting these tips into practice in your future presentations.